Hey everybody, I'm the Anime Trainer, and welcome back to The Power of God and Anime, the only podcast that I know of that talks about religious themes in anime and just theology things in general. Uh, Today we are down a man. We are missing the main character, so it will be me, Duffy, and Gary. So it's just going to be us three for tonight. Hopefully we keep your attention. If not, we're going to be here anyway. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the religious themes in Fullmetal Alchemist, particularly Brotherhood. Um, does anybody want to get us started?
Aye, Captain.
Okay, Duffy, get us started.
So this is widely accepted as like the best thing ever put to pen, and Miss Arakawa is just a genius. And considering the religious um, kind of culture that they have in Japan, it's I think incredible how varied the religious themes in FMA are. So we've got a lot of different groups here because like Oh, sorry to start here. I think a lot of people, a lot of fiction, will, if they want to address the idea of religion or God or faith, it's going to be shallow, and it's going to be mostly a comparison, or rather, a contrast between the believers and the unbelievers. Um, doesn't really matter what the author believes, if the author is an atheist or not. Um, that's usually the contrast, right? It's just a binary. We got so many different kinds of that though in FMA. So we've got the God-fearers, we've got the Ishvalan God-fearers. They've got their God, they've got their monks. Scar was a warrior monk, and he like studied their scriptures and uh, kept in line with what he thought was right based off of what their version of the Bible said. But then you've got the science worshippers, I guess you could call them, mostly the military. So like Ed falls into there. But among the science worshippers, you've got straight up atheists like Ed, and then I'm sure you've got some agnostics in there too. I mean, there's some people in the military, I think, kind of without saying anything about it, just based off their actions and their attitudes and their reactions to some of the more crazy godlike things going on in the story, kind of fall into that agnostic area. The people from Shing, they they don't ever in the anime state whether or not they've got some sort of religion they follow. I don't know if it's different from the manga, but I never saw that in the anime. But they do have this whole thing with the dragons, the dragon's pulse, and the chi and the life force of the earth. So they've got some spiritualism going on in their culture. All these various takes on God and religion and spiritualism and stuff are all really interesting. But what sticks out to me the most is how this story shows John chapter 12 verse 37 in action. So in this part of John, uh, John says, though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe in him. And then John quotes from Isaiah saying, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. So we know Jesus was right there in front of them, performing miracles, preaching the most mind blowing sermons these guys had ever heard, and this did not change anyone's hearts. It didn't produce faith. It didn't make believers. It was just you had people that were asking, "Show us some more signs," and Jesus would be like, "No, I've shown you enough signs. If those didn't do anything, then why would I do it? You're not going to believe anyway."
Yeah.
Uh, and it's because true faith comes from God, not because you saw something really cool or that you couldn't explain. Um, we could see everything. We could see the whole reality of truth revealed in front of us. And because sin is still such a stubborn taskmaster and such a blinding obstacle in our lives, it still wouldn't produce actual faith. And this is exactly what happened to Ed. So he goes through the portal, he meets God, he has the entire truth about how alchemy works and how the world kind of works. He gets more knowledge than he could have ever gotten from books and stuff. He meets God, talks with God, and even does deals with God three separate times in the story, and still walks away just completely, you know, arrogant about how none of that. He still doesn't believe in any sort of God. He's still an atheist. Still believes in science. Granted, he's humbled by the end of the show, but not enough to really go that way. His personality's too stuck in the mud about how highly he thinks of science as opposed to God.
Okay. Um, so yeah, the that topic where he is where Ed meets the truth and
Mm-hmm.
walks away from it, basically, still being agnostic slash atheist. Um, I've actually thought about that concept a lot as far as faith is concerned. Um, it really is going to come down to whether or not you want to believe. Do you want to believe or not? Because no matter what, I I can show you as much evidence for something. Doesn't have to be God. For something, uh, and you can still choose not to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, flat Earth and uh, brain injections, vaccines. You can.
I
My
love how you talk like a person whose English is not their native language, even though native English is your native language.
well, my brain just likes to conveniently forget words, and I don't know why. Um, but
Witty
anyway,
thing.
so
Vaccines.
yeah, so vaccines, flat Earth. You can show these people as much evidence as you want to, and it doesn't matter because they don't want that to be the truth, and so they won't believe it.
Yeah,
And so
your
there's
worldview can be override logic.
unless you are actively seeking to know what the truth is, you're not going to be swayed by evidence. Um, and so, and I think that that's something that you can look at and see with Ed. He really didn't care. He just had a goal, and it didn't matter what he had to do to accomplish that goal. But at the end of the day, he didn't care about whether or not there was or was not a God. And so, even confronted with the evidence of it, it didn't change anything about him because he wasn't interested in learning what the truth was. Um, and I think that's the same thing for people in terms of like faith in God. There are plenty of people that with zero evidence, like whatsoever, will believe in God at least on a like God exists level, um, because they want to. It's it's something that they want to exist. And there's plenty of atheists that there are quotes, and I can't remember them right now, but where atheists would say, if God Himself showed up and you saw the nail prints in Jesus's hands, and like the clouds rolled back, and like He walks right up to you and like says, this is the truth, they would still not believe. Like I've heard them say that, and it is a to blatantly like take evidence that would be that like you how are you going to get around it, that apparent, and throw it away because it's not what you like is ridiculous. I had one person tell me that what if you knew, I said, what if you knew for a fact that this is how the universe was? They said, I'd kill myself.
Hmm. Well,
Some people find their meaning in what their worldview is. If you
and I
live your
think
whole life thinking this, and it's wrong, it's gonna tear you apart.
and I think it's interesting how like Ed's pursuit to his goal, like alchemy itself, is based on uh, the supernatural, like uh, like Father or the dwarf in the flask was like a piece of the eye of truth mixed with Hohenheim's blood, and everything he does with alchemy is based off of that culmination of truth. And I mean, he even wears the what's it, the Flemel cross on his back, and Alphonse has it on his arm,
Yeah.
which was a monk, French monk in like the 15th century, and who did a lot of stuff with alchemy and stuff. But just the snake on the cross, from his studying in alchemy was you have to get rid of the impurities, in order to make changes and stuff like that. But yeah, even Ed's pursuit to his goals, restoring his brother's body, and all this other thing, even though he doesn't care about God, but like the route he benefits from what God created,
Yeah.
and uses it and is
But he's
proficient at it.
he's he's looking at it not as a supernatural thing at all, but as a
Right.
purely like scientific thing. And he's like, it can be studied with. This is all just, you know,
Right.
we are X number of different kind of elements combined. There's nothing special about it. But what's crazy is like he's confronted with the fact that it's not it's not just that.
Yeah. Like Father's
You can't.
existence and the homunculus existence themselves, it should just like destroy his just solidarity on
And the
everything, and
existence
then
of the Philosopher's Stone.
yeah, it should just shatter everything. But of course, he's steadfast and just like no, don't care, don't matter. And not saying that religion and science is mutually exclusive. Like I think one of the comments from one of the last videos, someone had brought up about science and religion, and I think you had mentioned that. Um, but yeah, like you can't, you really can't have one without the other. Like it's not. I remember I would talk to a lot of Chinese students at the on the campus of University of Tennessee, and we would ask them, engage questions about religion. It's like, oh no, we don't believe in religion, we believe in science. Well, I mean, you can have both. They don't, preclude each
They're not
other at
mutually
all.
exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they're not, and I think that's because their goals are different things.
right.
Because you can't, you know, like science is a process of finding truth in the universe through testable means. And so if something's not testable, it's you can't have a scientific opinion on it other than the fact that we don't know.
Right.
I mean, like they've done scientific studies on prayer, um, like to show that it basically has it's in line with the placebo effect. But
Hmm.
in that same way, um, is that to say that kind of thing does not exist? And I would say, from personal experience, absolutely not. Um, but maybe it's the sort of thing that isn't reproducible.
Hmm.
But I guess that's a completely different sort of conversation. But I mean, there's a lot of themes in there, and one of the themes in Full Metal Alchemist is um, the coexistence of religion and science, even with the Ishvalans, because they were like, "No, you can't have this. This alchemy's evil."
Yeah, it was the other end of the spectrum. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Scar
Scar.
was going after his brother for like, why would you even waste your time trying to learn this craft that Ishvala has forbidden us from?
Yeah,
And it turns out that he winds up using it in the end for the greater good.
yeah, Scar ends up becoming the Hammer of God via alchemy. At least in his eyes.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, through like one half of it, yeah, but then in the end, he does take on that second half of alchemy. Even though he still thinks it's wrong. He says, I have to put aside what I think here is right because there's more to be done. I could do so much more if I adopt something else that I personally hate.
Mhm.
And that was a real humbling moment for him.
so in talking about the Ishvalans and uh, their rejection of like particularly alchemy as a science, that doesn't necessarily mean that they rejected science, but at least it is if we're equating science and alchemy in the Full Metal Alchemist universe, then like that's parallel with there's plenty of religious groups that reject scientific progress,
Absolutely.
and even say that to that science is basically anti-God.
Yeah.
Um,
How many? I remember growing up hearing news reports of couples being prosecuted for involuntary manslaughter because they wouldn't take their children to a doctor Because if God wanted their kid to be sick, well, then he'd be sick. And if they wanted their kid to live, if God wanted their children to live, well, God would just heal them of whatever sickness it was, you know. And I mean, people were actually being prosecuted, thrown in jail because, like I said, they were on that other end of the spectrum in the here and now.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like what level of, and that's a problem I have with a lot of like religious type folk. They get so wrapped up in whatever it is they think is the truth, which is typically just a excuse me, a dogma or a uh, something that's fed to them by their
Hmm.
leadership.
Right.
Um, and it's like, oh, and they don't ever like search things for themselves
Hmm.
in the scriptures or in anything else, and then you end up with dead kids.
Well, when your church is telling you science is anti-God, then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to I shouldn't take my kids to the doctor. But
Yeah,
they don't
like
even
Ken.
stop to think that, hey, maybe God gave humans the ability to understand the natural world so that we can have science and medical
There's
science, and maybe this is God's will.
there's a quote from Ken Ham that says when it's the Bible, when it's God versus the scientist, who do we trust? God. And it's like that is what you just said isn't doesn't make any sense because you're assuming that it's God versus the scientist in a situation.
But it's
And it
actually
has to
your
be that way.
interpretation of the Bible versus the scientist, and you could
Yeah.
be wrong.
Yeah, you could absolutely be wrong.
Now, if God comes down from heaven and says this scientist and all of his theories are absolutely wrong, I'll take God's word on it. But he's never done that. So until then, my daughter is still going to the doctor when necessary.
Right. I like to think as science as complementary as, it gives us it kind of it gives us the why, whereas before, like maybe civilization wasn't they couldn't handle the truth, if that makes sense. For instance, like you would have witch doctors. If you felt sick, they would give you, a moldy piece of bread. Well, penicillin, wasn't, officially discovered until, whenever. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's what that mold had, was containing penicillin, and people felt better, you know. So science is not, like you said, pretty much what we've been saying this whole time. It's not science versus God. It's, I mean, they work together, you know.
Whenever you see a conflict in there, it's because of somebody's interpretation of one or the other.
I
Because
would agree with
science
that.
is actual science is not going to contradict the Bible, but science is, like you said, it's a process. The real scientific laws do not contradict what God says,
So yeah,
but our
I've got my
understanding of that
I've
changes.
I've obviously got my faith, and but I also like believe in the scientific process because it's got the goods. It has shown that it produces positive effects, and it shows that it is a form of finding the truth.
The
So
scientific method is all about logic and reasoning, and God made logic and reasoning. He gave it to us. We should probably utilize it.
yeah, so whatever truth I find, because God is the source of truth, that's going to be what the truth is. And I've purposefully tried to counter my own beliefs like all the time. That's like, what do I believe? Okay, let me just smash other things against it until I figure out what the truth is. And it's like even throughout everything that I've you know read and studied and experienced, it's like my faith still holds up.
Yeah, and that's the best thing, because some people have such a weak, superficial, um, faith or religion or denomination that they hold on to, and so they don't ever question anything, and they don't, whatever the pastor says, whatever, the youth leader says, whatever the deacon says, whatever, you know, Mr. Title says, they're just going to hold on to that and apply that to their lives instead of seeking the truth themselves, and instead of searching the scriptures as the Bereans did, looking for the proofs, and they're there. but they're just so scared of. I feel like they're so scared of any confrontation that it might break.
Yeah, and
They're
then
shatter
not
their entire worldview.
and oh goodness, people are so scared of having their worldview shattered, and it's like honestly, if your worldview is capable of being shattered, you should probably do that.
Get a new one.
Hiding from the truth, I don't understand. I mean, I understand the reason behind it. It feels safe to hide from reality. I've done it before myself, but in the end, it's just going to make you more vulnerable to what's out there, to
Yeah,
what's actually going on.
because when
I
it's
mean, how
when
many
it's your
times have you
worldview
seen it
versus reality, reality's gonna win.
every time? So how many times have you seen a church or church leadership try and uh, quell any sort of questioning? If you're questioning their teachings or what they think the Bible says, if you question it, well, hey, you can't question God because they're afraid of it. If
Well,
you
yeah,
bring
they
up that
equate
question,
whatever
I'm
they've
not
got is
questioning God, I'm questioning you.
yeah.
And if you really believe that you're right, my question shouldn't do anything but refine your position.
Exactly.
Yeah, search the truth, search the scriptures. Find the answer, and do your diligence to it. I mean, have that connection and that earnesty to do such. I mean, and decide that you're gonna find the truth and take it for whatever it may be. Um, you know, that's and that is something a anybody should encourage you to do. You know, anyone who has the right motives in mind is going to encourage you for you to learn it yourself. Just like anything else in life. Like
There's
my daughter's going to
yeah.
have to learn how to do chores and do this and do that, and I'm not going to be able to do it for her each time. She's going to have to learn it, and she's going to struggle, and it's going to be hard for her, and it's not so hard for me, but it's going to be hard for her, and I'm going to help her as much as I
Yeah.
can. But she needs to know how to do it herself.
Yeah.
And the same way, when we have questions about truth, I mean, it may be a struggle, and it may be hard, and it may, kind
It
of
has to be a struggle.
wreck your emotions. Yeah. But I mean, it's worth it. you know, uh, the
Because like
truth is absolutely worth it.
we've been going through these the everyday morality series that we've been doing. I don't know if you've watched any of them.
Oh yeah, I watched like 3 or 4 of them. I
But
really enjoy them.
well, yeah. I mean, anybody who's sort of a philosophy nerd's probably gonna like really enjoy it. And I told somebody that today. I was like, they said, "Oh, I haven't watched any of them." I was like, you know what? You probably won't because apart from the conversation that we're having right now, you're not gonna enjoy watching
It's
somebody
kind of
else
a
go through that
it's
process.
kind of a niche demographic that,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
But so even in that process, I bring that up just because um, you really don't realize how much people don't examine their own beliefs until you start asking questions, and then they'll go to talk and they go, "Oh, I've never
I'll
thought
give
of
you a
that."
good example. I'll give you a good example. Is is no one can live past 120 years old.
Oh gosh,
Did you ever
yes,
hear
I've
that
heard that.
growing up?
Yep.
Yep,
No
I
one can
heard
live
it.
past 120 years old because God told Noah, man has 120 years old. That's not what he was talking about. Like, he wasn't talking about that. He meant from the time he told Noah, hey, I'm going to, send judgment, is 120 years from when he told Noah that. Because Abraham lived to be over 120. And many other people in the Bible lived to be over 120, even into the days of the kings and the other books of history. And I mean, if you want to take it within itself, like we have people today who live past 120.
There's
But
there's
I mean, if you want
there's a
to work into the
song. It's
scope of Scripture,
there's a contemporary Christian song that says it's called "I Believe," and it says, "I believe Noah built an ark of wood, 120 years, no one understood," and it's like, yeah.
man,
It's
I
like,
never
man,
thought I
you
would
hitting
say
on
this, but
you
CCM
hit
for the
like two
win.
different things at the same time.
Is CCM allowed to have that much doctrine in one line? Like, is that
Oh
did they
gosh.
how they get that past like reviewers?
Okay,
Like,
Well,
no,
it's
you gotta
because
say Jesus and God.
it was close enough to a water metaphor that it got through.
Oh man,
uh, I'm reminded of, are we allowed to talk about John Christ anymore after everything else?
I
I'm
do
reminded of
whatever.
that,
This is our show. We'll talk about whatever we want.
I'm just, that's a joke.
He updated
It's
his
like,
profile picture, so I guess like it's in the past. I guess like he's back
it
on the
reminded me
scene
of
now. I guess.
the skit he did where some kids are trying to get into being a worship band, and they're like, you have to sign this contract, you have to use this many water metaphors in your songs and stuff like that. Um, Goodness. I've spent so long hearing about how CCM should just be just tossed out because it's shallow and it's pointless and
It's like
it's evil.
what do all
What
the
was the
worship songs in the Bible sound like? Holy, holy,
I,
holy is the Lord God Almighty on repeat.
Look,
CCM is
look,
repetitive.
look.
And
That's
then
the Bible. It's
the
different.
Beast sing
Okay.
that song day in day out. No, what was it? Something was going around the internet recently, and I saw it. And I sent it to you, Steven. It's this video of this guy who's legitimately trying to make the case that syncopation, backbeats in music, is witchcraft. It's powering the occult. And here's the thing: I had a pastor that believed that very thing. At my high school Baptist church slash school, this pastor would get up there and he would tell us during music class if the beat is on the third or the second, if it's on the if it's on the first or the third beat instead of the second or the fourth, then that music is satanic. It is going to make you want to move your body in sexual ways, and that's going to lead you to lust, and it's going to lead you to adultery, and then you're going to fall away from the church because that music had the beat on the accent on the wrong beat.
That is one slippery slope. Oh my goodness.
The logic or the actual concept?
Everything. It's just like, wow. I thought I was doing fine, and then I'm here singing the Book of Psalms, and now all I want to do is gyrate my body in
Gary, are you
carnal
twerking?
manner.
Oh, it wasn't the first and third beat. You're saying it was
It's
the second
called
and fourth beat.
worship. Look it up.
So this guy in this video that was going around a few weeks ago, he was like, if the accent's on the second or fourth beat, it's satanic. It powers the occult, like it actually fuels the occult with magical energy. And he said, so if you sing "Jesus Loves Me" with the beat on the accent on the wrong beat, it goes, "Jesus loves me, this I know for order." And he's like, it turned into a rap song. And I'm like, it's not because you're just singing the song wrong, man.
You also don't know what rap is.
Also, if that is what you're doing, aren't you powering the occult right now?
It's right now.
You
in this very
you just powered 3 spells, young man.
wow. That's where I don't understand. Like I guess like the rise of fundamentalism, was this point of a focus on sanctification, which is fine. But it became, I think, to a point, and this isn't to knock, like I don't want to make this where I get on here and I just knock like traditionalism and like everything under the sun and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of fundamentalism stopped being about sanctification and started being about separation. And that's where it's like, well, you can't have this sound like, Poison or, AC/DC, which, we can all agree AC/DC, their songs are not very Christian songs, that is acceptable. And if you get it, something that sounds in a beat similar to it, you want to be completely separated away from it. But it becomes very pharisaical and, the
Hyper legalistic.
Very,
yeah,
very fair.
it takes that appearance of evil to the most extreme. So I mean, I remember when I was in the Philippines, those people from around the world, for you guys from a bunch of different churches from around the world, while we were there for this week-long meeting in the Philippines, and this one guy was talking about how the trend for women to wear jeans is rising. So he thought about just stop wearing jeans altogether, and I guess only wear khakis, I guess, or dress pants or dress slacks or whatever. And it's like that just seemed, and he was like dead serious, and it's just like that just seems so
Oh yeah, I
so
had
much like
there
a
was
minor issue.
a missionary from somewhere. I don't know where. I don't remember where. I think it might actually been like Scotland. Missionary from
Oh,
Scotland.
was it
You
that
probably know
night?
who I'm talking about.
I was
Um,
there.
he said
Oh
he
no.
said my children have never seen me in a pair of shorts. I'm like, oh, your well-turned calf is turning your daughter to the dark side.
Yeah, Duffy. This gentleman said that his wife, when she was painting their house, when she got up on a ladder, she would pin her skirt up while she would work because she couldn't be working in anything other than a dress or a skirt when doing anything.
I have family that's like that. I have an aunt and her daughters dress that way no matter what the situation, and it's because my uncle just straight up believes that's the way all women should dress no matter what.
You know what gets me about a lot of people like that is they will harp on their daughters, uh, you know, skirts, dresses, but they will let their sons run out in like half a t-shirt and their underwear, and I mean just
Yeah,
um,
there. I
total
lived
double
with a
standard.
guy. I lived with a guy for a year. He was my guardian, and
Mm,
not once was like I could wear whatever I wanted. I mean, I wasn't like wearing like going out my underwear. I was I had a t-shirt and I had
right.
shorts. Fine. This guy would wear the most ragged looking sweatpants and ragged t-shirt. He didn't give a crap what he was wearing. But his
Rules
wife,
for
his
thee and not for
daughters,
me.
yeah, exactly. Now we've got these like fundamentalism. I realized it a long time ago that it really sounds like, at least from what I can tell, people saw sin problems creeping up into the church and said, we're going to create a tradition that should just stop that in its tracks,
Yeah,
which I'm not against. But then when you lose track of why that tradition was created in the first place, then you wind up with these laws that you don't even know, why do we even have these laws in the first place? I'm not a musical guy, but I love Fiddler on the Roof. And so does my uncle
Eh,
that has that issue with his daughter's dressing,
he's
okay?
got good taste, Gary.
oh yeah,
And my uncle loves that one because it's all about tradition. He loves tradition and making the women wear the dresses and the men go out and sweat on the brow and whatnot. I realized when I was like, the movie is not about, the play isn't about how good tradition is. It's about how bad tradition is. I
it's
mean, at the
about
end of it, he's got three daughters, and for two of them, he lets tradition slide and lets them marry who they want. The third one, he's holds to tradition really strongly and says, "No, you'll do what I say." And out of all of his relationships, the one where tradition reigned over his relationship with his daughter, they have the most strained relationship. Tradition is not some sort of go-to, all-powerful, great. Just this is on par with the Bible.
right.
And honestly, that's a large problem with that I have with the church as a whole currently. And when I say the church, I mean like all denominations across the board, like
Christendom.
Mm-hmm.
Christendom. Yeah, I have a problem with that because people like talk about their traditions and their doctrines and all this other stuff, not realizing that a lot of that stuff was codified in the Catholic Church, like way back
Yeah,
when. And it's like you're still doing the kinds of things that the Catholics did, but just kind of less Catholic than they did it. And it's just because the Reformation and the Protestantism and all that came out of the Catholic Church. So how could it not be influenced by the Catholic Church? And even in
yeah.
I've heard people argue that there's always been a church and an ecclesia that existed alongside Catholicism as an independent church. But honestly, like if there was, I I don't know. I don't really know because like I've only seen a couple of books written about it, and it's kind of shaky.
Hmm. Well, I know
And
a big thing um, is, I mean, especially with like the schooling I had, was that Baptists are hold the most closely related doctrine to the Bible. Um,
Isn't that what everybody says?
that's
I
what
know,
every
I
church
know,
says about
I know. That's what
themselves.
everybody says. We're biblicist. Well, everybody says that. Everybody thinks we're biblicist.
Just read the Bible.
No, yeah,
I'm
just
not.
read the Bible. Just read the Bible. It's all right. Just read the Bible. No, but one of the things is that uh, a group of people who never became part of the Catholic Church, went by different names. They were known as Paulicians, the Waldensians,
Waldensians,
um,
yeah.
yeah, stuff like that, who held to doctrines such as no infant baptism, baptism after repentance, faith alone,
Yeah.
um, things like that. Whereas, as time went on, the not to, I'm trying not to, I want to be not offensive, but also want to like slate
Go
my
ahead.
opinion.
Go ahead.
Say what you're gonna say.
That Catholic doctrine over time has just warped what was the original intentions.
Sure.
And so,
And I
uh,
think you can make a pretty solid historical case for that.
right. And not to say, I mean, we were just talking about how like fundamentalism drifted away from sanctification and separation. So like, this is not saying, I just want to end all Catholics. That's, not the case at all. I don't want to end all Baptists. I don't want to end all, Church of God people or anything like that. But they held that, the big thing. And it's funny because Baptists they go by that title, Baptist. Um, and, but I know baptism is not required for salvation in Baptist doctrine. It's salvation, repentance, and then baptism as a show of faith. There's no infant baptism, the Eucharist, communion. There's no transubstantiationism.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I
There's
know what you
no
meant.
turning of actual into blood or the bread turning actually into the blood of Christ, things like that. But yeah, what you mentioned earlier about those things of the Catholic Church like creeping into Protestantism. I think one person put it really good. They said Luther left the church, broke from the Catholic Church, but he took a good amount of furniture with him when he did leave.
Yeah, I would say
Um,
so.
The
so
question: what do you think the Protestant church would look like now if instead of Luther saying, "Oh, we need to reform Catholicism," just said, "We need to get out of this and then look and see what the early church did during the first century or two after Christ, and like try and get back to our roots there." How
I
different would things
honestly feel
be?
like it would be a lot less centralized. Um, I feel like it would be a lot more like communities of people and like living together and whatnot. Um, but in less so much on a building. Um,
Yeah, like yeah, the whole we got these buildings, we got stained glass windows and stuff depending on the church you're from. I remember being surprised. I walked into my first Presbyterian church with my wife's, and I walked in there. I was like, "Yeah, stained glass windows. Isn't that a Catholic thing?" And she's like, "No, it's a Presbyterian thing." And then I was like, "Oh, okay. There are places that have have stained glass windows." I was coming from the Baptist church, so I had only ever seen this in the Catholic settings before. But it's so like every denomination, no matter the differences, for the most part, have their services Sunday morning in a separate building. There's a guy up on stage with a podium or a pulpit or something like that, and there's music, and then there's prayer, and then there's talking, and then maybe some more music. It's weird. Like every denomination has essentially the same setup, the same order of services. Sometimes they get more specific, but it's like, isn't where did all this come from? Because it wasn't happening in the early church.
so on that, um, uh, yeah, I had this one guy, and he actually lives here in Greenville, but he would commute from Greenville um, to Tennessee, where I attended college,
oh wow.
and teach our classes. And he would talk about how the way that a lot of churches are set up now, there's a stage and there's an audience. It's a lot like a Greek theater. Like there's a performance almost,
Hmm.
and then so we sit back, we hear someone talk, and all that kind of stuff. There's a passing of a tithe plate, you know, down the rows. Apparently, that originated. Like I haven't looked this up myself, but based on his word, similar to how you would pay for a performance at a Greek
Oh
theater
yeah,
in the early
absolutely.
centuries. So, like when
Wow.
he was a pastor, the way he set things up, um, they wouldn't have a tithing plate. In the foyer, there was a tithing box. And before any kind of service, if you were to pay a tithe, you'd slip it in the box. There was no tithing music, there was no offering
Grace
music,
does
there was
that,
no
don't they?
offering plates.
Duffy.
What does that?
Grace does that, right? There's like a spot at the
Um,
front of the like in the foyer
yeah,
area
there's
where you can.
where you can do your donations, yeah,
Okay,
which
yeah.
Yeah,
I think is great because I feel like if I think there are people, and I've been that person where like if this wasn't happening right in front of everybody else, I probably wouldn't be putting anything in here. So
yeah,
I'm going to do this simply so I don't look like I'm being cheap or something.
right. Which speaks to the intent of the heart. Think of the widow's mite, but even the church I grew up in, the pastor told me he did that, and I mean, they didn't see tithes go down at all. I mean, it stayed pretty consistent. But they changed it back because, I don't know, tradition, or something like that. But and instead of having like a stage and an audience, it was in the center of the room is where he would preach, and then the congregation formed like a circle around him, which apparently was more. Once again, to his words, I haven't looked this up myself. To my chagrin, um, he would stay in the center, and the congregation would surround him, and he would turn and speak and everything, which is more in line,
Like a
according to him, to
rabbi speaking to
yeah, like our
the
rabbi
students.
speaking instead
Interesting.
of instead of just like a lecture, or just a performance. Rather, it was more on the level. We're all equals here, kind of thing.
Probably entertaining questions too.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and see, that's the kind of church I'd love to go to, because every other church that I've ever been to, it's set up like a lecture hall. I mean, you're comparing it to Greek theater, but I've always thought of church like a lecture hall because, like, you go to college and you got a whole bunch of people in an auditorium, completely impersonal, one person on stage, and that's it. And it's been researched, and the studies that I've looked at said that is like the most ineffective way of teaching people anything because there's no room for questions, there's no room to get down and personal with
Most
anybody. It's
people are
just
falling
listen to
asleep,
me
so
talk. Most
Yeah,
people are
unfortunately, the
exactly, yeah.
reality, the reality of today's modern American congregation is, like you said, people are falling asleep. It's like it's a lecture hall. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I fell asleep in my college courses. Um, Someone would have
But
to
the
stab me in the hand with a pencil to wake me up.
but the smaller groups where you was the teacher and there was like I don't know 10 desks and everyone could talk, those are the classes I learned the most in. I was engaged and there was room to ask questions and interact with each other. Those ones I learned stuff in. The lecture classes I got my naps in. I mean, I went to Bob Jones University and we have this big building there called the FMA, not Full Metal Alchemist. It stands for something else. I can't remember. Founders Memorial Amphitheatrium.
That's an alchemist building. That's
So
Kima State
it's
Alchemist
really
at
big. It's
Baki.
got statues and symbols and stuff. So I'm sure there's some alchemy going on there.
Are you
Um,
praying or are you just activating the Eye of Truth?
but you go in there and it was just this huge auditorium with this tiny little stage all the way in the back with these giant grand wooden chairs that make the Pope's current chair look kind of wimpy. And you just go there, you sit down, and I fell asleep in like most of those things. You have to go there every single day for chapel, and whatever. I'm tired. I was up all night doing homework.
Now,
Get a nap in
to
here.
to kind of speak to what like the point of conversation that brought us to this point was, early church Christians. To be fair, early church Christians, that was illegal. Like you couldn't have that building. It wasn't
true.
really like, mainstreamed until the conversion of Constantine. And then it was like, okay, Christians are cool. Being a Christian, someone in leadership's now a Christian, kind of made that maybe got to where we are now from there, perhaps. But I mean, to be fair,
Maybe,
it
but
was illegal.
I mean, a lot of things
Yeah,
are
and
illegal.
honestly, I think so. When I think about like how church is, like how church ought to be run, the first thing that pops into my mind is underground churches in places where it's illegal.
Yeah, like you think of like China, um,
That's the first place that
underground,
pops into my head.
like North Korea, is these, like you said, it's small and it's engaging. It's still pastor led. Like some people don't get that, and they want to, they want to hold on to that title and the power that comes with being a pastor, I suppose. But I mean, you still have like a person who's a pastor, and it's pastor led, but it's still it's still a church.
Mhm.
It's still, like
Yeah.
you said, engaging. You're still able to grow and to like, you know reach others, and spread the gospel, because the underground church in China is like in the millions, estimated
Wow.
wise. I mean, it's nuts. What you think of a country with, you know, 2 billion people or whatever, but
Today we
Um,
were listening to the sermon that was preached today over audio, whatever, and the pastor was saying, once we get back to normal, how many people aren't going to come back? Because like, do you just come to church because because it's expected of you, or do you come because you want to? I'm thinking, doesn't matter if you go what reason you go for. There's a lot of people that are going for the sake of appearances, and they go there, they sit in their chair, they stand up, they do the holy aerobics, and then they get in their car and they leave without talking to anybody.
some of them
I
people could
mean,
stand to do actual aerobics.
I mean, talk about don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. Well, yeah, but if you just show up, take the free coffee, and then go, you may as well just not come. So people are worrying about church attendance.
Well, yeah,
I'd be
what there
more
was
worried about church engagement,
the
which is something that
movement,
you could
the
do if you just
movement for
lecture halls
growing
all night.
churches. I, I, I listened to a big like show about that one day. I don't remember exactly when it started, but at some point they started like, there was these guys who were going around like fill your churches up. Here's a way to get people in the building. Here's a way, and it's like you count every week. Well, I had this many this week and this many this week, and you have that continuous growth as if number of people in the building was the goal
right.
when that's not
Yeah.
what the goal is.
Yeah, that's a early mid 20th century thing. Once again, like John R. Rice. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but John R. Rice was recorded as saying, "I believe in small churches for about 6 months. After that, they should be big churches." You know, and I think that mindset, if you make that the goal, like you said, that's just church attendance, church filling, and once again, feeds into that theater. Like, how can we fill up this theater? How
Yeah,
can we fill up
and it's
this
like, are
performance? Still,
what are you doing that with the church in and of itself? Because like I have a problem with churches spending an exorbitant amount of money on uh, real estate, so to speak, as far as like giant buildings that look really pretty and all that. Is well, it's a house of God. It should look pretty. It's like, no, think about what you could do with that money that would actually benefit people.
yeah,
Do you guys remember what the tabernacle was at first? It was a tent.
badger skin. But yeah,
You don't need to have Solomon's Temple recreated on every downtown area. We can just have a building. You could just rent out. I mean, there are churches out there that just rent out gymnasiums at public schools, and they have to set up, 100 folding chairs or more every single week, and then take them all down and make sure it's ready for
yeah,
school on
but
Monday. They
you
do
know,
that because it's better use of their money. They see they could
yeah,
print more Bibles. They could spend more on missionaries. They could, I don't know, not have a crappy VBS week.
I mean, I know, but I mean, I don't know. It should look. It should be. Trying to think of a way not to sound legalistic at all, but it's getting harder and harder. Um, but no, like I think if you have your own building, that's awesome. It should be in good working order. It should be all your ducks in a row.
Sure,
If you can do
function
it,
is one
if you
thing.
function, I don't think everything should be lined in gold by any means. Like, I don't think you should spend $2,000 on a bench. And when I say a bench, I don't mean a pew. I mean a bench that can maybe seat one bottom, and it's for decoration up front. You know, um,
Like
I think there's
I
definitely a balance to these things.
like back at, and I don't want to name churches, but
Right.
um
Name
back at
them.
a
No, I'm kidding.
back at another church, you know, when I was a teenager, it's like at one church they spent like $30,000 on two different grand pianos, and it's like, uh,
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that. And then it's like at this other church that I went to, it's like they raised a whole bunch of money to build a basically a basketball gymnasium
Right.
so that they could do, you know, have basketball teams, because you wanted to, beat First Baptist at something. Um, and it's like, and it's like, why are we doing this?
Yeah. It, oh man. Yeah, it's tough. I've been in churches where they needed help bring a piano in, so I would help them bring them in, and we get it. I'm like, man, this is the biggest piano I've ever seen, and the guy who brought it, he's like, yep, they don't come any bigger or more expensive. Like it was a huge like Steinway and Sons, which apparently is a brand name piano, which I didn't know pianos had brand names. I guess it makes sense, but I mean, it took probably 10 of us like stocked guys to move it up, and you think about it, like I guess if someone like paid for that,
If somebody
maybe
donated
like
it or something.
yeah, someone yeah, but like it's. But I mean, there's a drive for
But
the best, and if the best is available, let's get the best. And like,
and then you have like
that's
mega
not
churches that
wrong.
have like planes and stuff, which is obviously
Oh
Yeah,
like
gosh.
ridiculous.
I mean, you can't
that's
even count that as a church. Like, if your pastor has a private jet, this is not a church.
but if he's able to, why not? I guess that's the
Okay.
common argument is if the church is able to, if you can,
Because
why not?
no, and I'll tell you why not. Because that's
Tell
not
me why not.
that's not the role of the church. It's not what Jesus would have said to do with the money from the church at all.
Well,
That's not
it
what
sounds like you read your Bible, and it makes making me really uncomfortable right now. So,
it would.
no, but I mean that's the common
The birds of
argument.
the air have nests. The foxes in the ground have holes to dig their head in. But the Son of Man has a private jet.
That's not in the Bible. All
Oh,
right. And I'm not
sorry.
just talking about the King James. That's not even in the Amplified. All right. That's not even in the Message.
I don't know, man. Have you read the whole message?
No. I have standards. No.
Green up.
Green.
Lindsay's reading that right now, actually.
Oh man.
She's read
Now
the whole
listen.
Bible all the way through the KJV,
Satan.
all the way through in the ESV,
I'm bad,
and
dude.
now she's listening to it in the message through audiobook while reading the ESV to see the differences.
Bless her heart. Godspeed.
Okay, let's take it back to FMA for a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, we got. We got
Okay,
wait.
so so obviously and I want to take your opinions on this. I feel like the Ishvalans are more Islamic than they are Jewish.
I've heard that before. I don't know.
Like if you watch the series and you try to make comparisons, I feel like they are more Islamic than they are Jewish. Partially due to their dress, and partially due to the nature of the name Ishvala. You know, Allah.
Mm.
And and then partially due to, isn't there a statue of Ishvala at one point?
Is there?
I feel like there is. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Ishvala.
Yeah. While you're looking at I could see where someone may miss it. Well, not. I can see where someone would try to make the reflection of Jewish people, but I mean, I think that is a stretch. Like you're just making like these brown-skinned people who wear, this type of clothing and they're severely oppressed. Well, I mean, yeah, like
Yeah, I
they're
mean
Jews,
you're
but
saying that they're
Well, I
that
mean,
they're
Amestris is clearly Germany, and after what they did to the Jews, it makes sense why a lot of people assume Ishvala are
is a
the Jewish
Mistress Germany
people.
though? Like I know there's a
Yes.
fewer. I
No,
know
it's
there's
supposed to be
There's a
it's supposed to be a parallel to Germany, but that doesn't mean that it's Germany because
it's
it's not our Earth, you know.
it's an analog
because
of
I see
Germany,
people who are like
and we're not.
FMA Brotherhood is white supremacy because there's a Fuhrer, you know.
The Fuhrer is the bad guy. If it was a white
He is
supremacist,
the bad
guy.
the Fuhrer would be the good guy.
But the role of Fuhrer is not the bad guy. The person who was Fuhrer at the time
Fuhrer is just
is a bad guy.
Isn't Fuhrer German?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
the word. So why are we arguing about whether or not it's a German word?
I don't know. I don't know how we got here.
So yeah, I mean, like some
I
of
don't see a
the
statue
reading
of
that I'm doing
Ishvala in
here
there.
basically says that that Ishvala, the whole thing, is a combination of some Jewish, uh, some Islamic, and some Christian like
I mean,
imagery and whatnot.
it's no doubt heavily Semitic
Yeah,
in nature. Arab and
Hmm.
Jewish,
yeah, yeah,
Hebrew.
yeah.
Definitely the mesh is all there. Um, I'm not sure if I could lean one way or another as far as like which one's heavier. Maybe feel it's like heavier Muslim or Islamic rather. Um, then good on you.
I mean, that's just what I felt like. I felt like it was obviously it's one or the other, um, or I guess it could be a combination. I just
Yeah.
picked up a lot of like Islamic type
Hmm.
feelings watching it. So I want to talk about. Did you have something to say?
I was just going to comment further on that a little bit. What can be misconstrued, but I mean, I'm just it's
You're
no point.
nitpicking.
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't want to
No,
don't want to take up all the time nitpicking. So go ahead.
you're fine. So father, um, uh, would you say that he's a Lucifer analog? Like,
Oh my gosh, I have that in my notes right here. He said, Father,
because
I'm like,
like
don't you dare say he's Lucifer, because I have that.
he wants to be like God above all else, and he doesn't care how he gets there.
Right.
After
Um,
the origin, he is Lucifer in every way.
I think that's almost where like I mean he makes the homunculi to cleanse himself of the seven deadly sins, and I don't see him as a perfect analog of Lucifer. I get he's made from the truth. He's made from he kind of has that fallen, but I mean
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit too much
but
of
I
a
mean,
stretch,
so
especially with
he
being combined with Hohenheim to be made. Like there's a
sure,
human factor.
sure. When I
The
say
thing he
complete,
hates
it's not a
most.
complete analog, but I feel like he's at the very least a um, the word is escaping me because my brain doesn't like words. It's an A word.
Illusion.
It's either illusion or allegory.
Allegory. I yes, but
Because there's this
Okay,
whole
well,
what's up?
let's say outside of his origin, which I think doesn't have a lot of Lucifer parallels there, this guy goes off, starts his own kingdom, so that he can manipulate it and use it as he sees fit. He uses deception, murder, he all these secret plottings and plannings and controlling the world government and stuff, or rather his
Basically
world,
becomes
his
the
kingdom's
god of the
government
world.
becomes he does it all in secret too. He's using other people to do his will, and also that he can ascend to godhood. He wants to get up there to God and claim that power for himself. You may as well just say, "I will ascend to Most High. I will be like God." You may as well say the same word that Lucifer said.
I will be like the
Um,
Most High.
I'll be like the Most High, exactly, because that's his whole plan is just I want the power of God, not I want to conquer the world, not I want everyone to respect me. He doesn't have like a typical villain motive for this. He just no, I just want God's power for myself. That's it. What he does after that, who knows what he would have done if he got away with it. Um, but I do want to ask. I know that he says that off of his own sins and desires, whether it was gluttony or greed or anything like that. If that was the case, why was he still a bad guy? Like he still had this whole
Because he's
greed
human.
to.
He's part
He's still.
human. He's got Hohenheim's blood, and he is Father. The Dwarf from the Flask is probably my second favorite FMA
Oh, okay.
character.
Let's hear about it.
I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't know his and maybe it's his, like I said, his attempt to purify himself. He creates lust, creates greed, creates this, but he thinks he can just separate himself from those things and purify himself from it. Like a lot of people think, I'm going to abstain from all these different things instead of dealing with them and, uh, dealing with them in a healthy way or in a spiritual way. It's like, no, I'm going to avoid it at all costs. But he still, has those things in him. He still
Sure.
wants power. He still
He
desires these things. He doesn't necessarily lust after people, or like as like
sure.
traditionally as we think in a carnal way lust, but he craves that power. He lusts after it. He needs that fulfilling in his life of that massive power.
Sure. So two
Yeah.
Like,
things. He separates those things from himself, but like you said, he doesn't deal with them in the sense that if they were still a part of him, like they can be tempered, they can be directed toward more productive things, but
mhm.
instead he's like, I'm just going to remove them from me so that I can be pure. But Duffy asked a good question. Why does he still do things that are bad? And it's
Like,
because
why is he still? Yeah.
yeah, because your passions don't have anything to do with whether or not you're choosing moral or immoral things. Because morality is rational. He still has that rational portion of him, but he's just not exercising it to think of in terms of morality. He's focused on his goal. The goal is the only thing and he's pursuing in a rational way. He's not trying to pursue being better in a rational way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when basically he exists and he says, I'm going to be like God above all else, and he does not care about life or anything that he does, like anything that he like might harm in the way of getting to that power. Instead, he could have been like God in the way that God is, like by trying to be like God as like his character instead of just his power.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah. Sorry, I ranted.
Yeah. Sorry, no, it's fine. Um, were you, I'm just thinking. You said like the way he pursued it was the rational way,
No, so he pursued his goal in a rational
right?
way in the sense of I want this thing and I'm going to do everything that it in my power to get to that point. But
Right.
he
So
didn't think about like like being better in a rational way. So like he does that make sense? Because you can
yeah. So
pursue a goal in a rational way but not necessarily be rational completely.
right. I was gonna ask. I was gonna, or rather, just bring up rationality versus. Is there a rational way, and then does that always line up as the right way? Because like
So
rationally, this is the way, but is that the right way? And then you get
so
into conversations of
it
right
depends
and
on what
wrong.
your goal is. So if you're think because you have to apply that term rational to something. So if you're saying if I have a goal and I want to accomplish that goal, the rational thing to do is to do everything that's going to get me to that goal. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
But if I'm trying to live rationally, what I'm trying to do at that point is I've got something higher as a goal. I'm trying to live as rationally as possible, which means is
Okay.
I want um, to live in because I know I'm not God, and I know that
Right.
it's possible for things to kill me, and I know that I'm not omnipotent. It is rational for me to live in a way that does not harm other rational beings, because they could, they do
Okay.
eventually kill him.
So like, so the first of the goal and pursuing that goal in a rational way, doing whatever you can. That's like the Thanos did nothing wrong kind of argument. Would that be
Because
that
he
like a
what
pragmatic kind of?
so he yeah, so it's you have a goal, you're it's not even it's you're not quite you're actually not concerned with right or wrong at all. You're just concerned with accomplishing a goal.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. um so like you can say like Thanos did nothing wrong in terms of like, oh, I think what he did was right because of, there's a lot of suffering and it, obviously there was some good that
Right.
came
Right.
out of it because blah blah blah.
Whales.
Whales. Um, but in terms of father, um, he is not acting rationally as far as knowing his place in the world amongst other rational beings. He is only focused on himself and attempting to um, gain that goal that he has.
Right.
So he's not acting rationally with the world. And not only does that come back and bite him because he actually gets killed,
Hmm.
um, but God himself says, uh-uh,
Yeah.
you done
Yeah.
goofed.
which, as like we brought up before, like he made the homunculi to purge himself, but he didn't have those purgings. Like case in point, what you just said, pride. I mean, yeah, he made pride, the little boy and everything, but he still that pride in himself to
Yeah.
think, couldn't find his place among other rational beings.
Yeah. I think you have to make a distinction between an emotional pride, wrath, envy, all that stuff,
Mm,
and like an intellectual version of what those might look like.
right.
No, I think that
Because
makes perfect sense.
yeah.
So I mentioned that Dwarf in the Flask father is my second favorite. Who
Okay.
is your guys' favorite character?
Von
Any
Hohenheim.
series?
Character. That's
So Von
hard.
Hohenheim is yours, Duffy.
Yep.
That's
Hohenheim
very
is
difficult.
Why?
um
Don't be asking why. That's my
I
question.
Sorry. Sorry, this is
welcome to another episode of Everyday
crossover
Morality.
episode.
Why? Why? I think Hohenheim is just I really like him as a character for one thing. I think he's pretty cool,
Mhm.
but I think he exemplifies a good man out of everyone else in that show because he owned up to his responsibility. Um, I love the fact that he took the time to talk to and learn the name of every single soul within him.
Mhm.
Like that would have taken so long because it's like 500. It was either
It's a
500,000 or
lot.
500 million. I think it was like
It's
half.
a lot.
I think it was like half a billion people in him. Um,
That's insane.
but yeah, I know, right? To learn all of those people's names and stuff, and then to respect those souls so much as to not use that power unless absolutely necessary. Lior, when during their reconstruction, he is starving. He needs something to. He needs drink. He needs food, and that just shows that he is not just expending the Philosopher's Stone in him to keep him sustained, because that would be expending souls that he
And
respects and wants to.
but what's
He doesn't
interesting is
want
that
to just use willy nilly.
he was okay with doing it when they said,
When
"Out,
they
let's
were
do
okay
it."
with it.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, "Let's do it."
When
Yeah.
Father sticks his hand in Hohenheim's back to take some of his Philosopher's Stone, and you see like 5 or 6 people go into him and they start fighting back, he's like, I know exactly who they were. He starts naming
Mhm.
exactly who's in. Said every one of those 5 or 6 souls are now is inside you fighting back. Like,
Mhm.
And
that kind
and
of devotion to principle is amazing.
what's
Good.
phenomenal is Hohenheim is a perfect foil to Father because Hohenheim is the most rational character in the show as far as how he's living because
Right.
he has access to near limitless power
Right.
and doesn't use it because it involves harming other people.
Right.
And now as a father and a husband, I really his story really makes me emotional. I think it's a great story because he recognizes, he's put this off long enough. Father has to be stopped. It's his responsibility. There's no one else that he knows that could possibly foil Father's plans, whatever they are. So he does the research. You see footage of him researching, trying to figure out exactly what the Dwarf in the Flask is going to do. And when he figures it out, he packs up his stuff. He tells his wife, I have to go away for a while. Don't know how long I'll be gone. Will you wait for me? Sure. And he leaves, knowing that his boys are going to miss him. He can't. I get that he couldn't like look them in the eye really well when he was leaving because maybe that would cause him to give up on this whole plan. He even tells Panak at one point, "I need you to take Winry and you need to get out of Amestris for a while because he doesn't know if he'll succeed." Well, he could have just taken Trish and the boys and gotten out and saved them,
Right.
Yeah,
but
but he knew
he
he had a
had that
responsibility.
Yeah.
because this creature would not exist without his blood, and he wouldn't have this power had Hohenheim not cooperated with him all those years ago. And he could make excuses for sure, like I didn't know I was being used, I didn't know what he was capable of, but in the end, still his responsibility. So for the sake of setting the right example for his boys, for caring for his family, but also making sure that the people of Amestris don't suffer because he was too scared, he goes out and does an amazing job with absolutely no recognition. And of course, without Hohenheim, we wouldn't have somebody finding him in Lior and saying, "Hey, Mr. Ho." I've always juvenile joke, but I love that line.
Man. Okay. I guess that's a pretty okay answer for
Okay,
for,
answer, okay.
for whatever.
I'm
What about you,
good.
Steven?
It's okay. It's
That's cool.
probably pretty lame, but Mace Hughes.
Oh.
I get
It's
it.
always
I
been.
get it.
It's always been Mace Hughes.
Gonna make me cry. He's the best.
Because he exemplifies everything that I ever wanted to be as a child, which was like a very good father and husband. And I don't know. I love Mace Hughes. There's other characters that are great. It's just like, and that's how great a story of Fullmetal Alchemist is, because it says like they kill Mace Hughes, like the most lovable character in
Spoiler
existence,
alert.
And
and
it
and
happens
it's like,
so early on compared to all the other events.
Yeah.
And yet,
and
he's still memorable throughout the whole thing.
oh yeah, because he stays as in, like, for instance, in people's minds as who he was. Like, he's that memorable. It's not just like, oh, somebody died. It's like, no, people are constantly thinking about this man in what they're doing, pushing forward,
Right. Like,
because he was such a good man.
Yeah, and he didn't seek, he didn't seek power for himself. He was someone Roy Mustang could always absolutely 100% count on, and Mace Hughes was going to 100% give him his support. The only people Mace Hughes put above Roy Mustang was, of course, his family. So yeah, I can definitely see that Mace Hughes was.
Cool.
I love
Very good.
I love what Mustang had to say at the funeral after the funeral was over. It's like, you were supposed to push me to the top, and here you are now outranking me after death. Give me the dang promotion.
So I've got one more thing on my notes, and it's the Tree of Life on the door.
Hang on. Gary,
Okay.
who's your number one
Oh,
character?
sorry.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
it's
who's
it's
your
fine.
number one?
I want to know who it is.
You guys are gonna make me feel like trash, because my number one favorite character in FMA Brotherhood is Wrath, 110%. Führer Bradley,
Interesting.
You're
favorite
King
character.
Bradley. Okay.
You neo-Nazi.
Don't say that. That's how rumors get started. But I mean, he's smart. He is deadly. He is the only homunculi not to have a bunch of spare backup souls. He only has the one. It may not be his original one. He said he doesn't know that if it's the original one, but he only has the one. And he's willing to do. I guess he's the dark side of doing whatever it takes to get the job done, kind of guy. And he's just ferocious, and just something about that, I don't know, I like it in a bad guy.
What is that
like
noise
he's
in
a
the
great
background?
bad guy. I have no idea. It's not mine, but something musical,
What kind of sound is it?
It's like music.
like piano,
Oh gosh.
almost.
Yeah, that would be my daughter's go to bed music.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I
that's
was
what.
like,
Not too powerful.
Lord?
The Rapture.
But yeah, Wrath
I
is
think
just-
that's an interesting answer. I love how, if you don't know who he is at first, he seems like such a kind guy. Like, he has that family man smile on his face. Oh, he gets into trouble. Yes, he's a supportive guy, but he gets in trouble when he goes and ditches his security team to go visit Ed in the hospital. Like, oh, this guy's he's cool. And then,
jumps
no,
out the window.
this guy's gonna
It's
kill everybody. Yeah,
I think that's just such a fantastic look, because the fact that they did that with the Führer really showcases that real life dictators are also people.
Yeah.
And they can seem really likable, but they can be terrible people.
Terrible tyrants. And even in death, King Bradley was celebrated as a hero. They couldn't tell the world that he was a homunculi. He died a hero. But, I mean, this guy took on tanks with a sword. And if you don't like that, you can get out of my face right now.
This is true. That was really cool. Really cool scene. His final fight with Scar, is one of the
Phenomenal.
most. It's a phenomenal moment. It's very poetic. Two nameless men fighting to the death. I love it.
My it's like Fuhrer King Bradley fights everyone,
Yes.
and it's like
Y-
and wins.
Yeah.
You
Like
know,
like and which kind of brings up the whole thing with Scar being the hammer of God and the eclipse, blinding King Bradley with his own sword for Scar to get the advantage and the win. That happenstance of providence. You could say is the only reason that he even lost. But I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, he's just a monster, relentless. His fight with Fu and the others is it's great. I love it. I love it all.
great.
Greed's
That's
probably
fantastic.
up there in number three.
Yeah, I
so
asked
pretty
Isaiah
cool.
what his favorite character was, and he said it was Greed.
Yeah. Oh my.
The
I
second
guess top.
second Greed.
It's
Oh yeah.
So
Greeling.
like, yeah, Greeling.
I don't know. But yeah, top five favorite
Okay,
characters are probably all bad guys. But anyway, go ahead.
that's all right. So my uh, that's pretty par for the course for you. Um, so the Tree of Life on the door. It's obviously a little bit different, but it's like Kabbalah stuff. I don't know if you guys know anything about the Kabbalah, and like the tree of Sephiroth, like the tree of Sephiroth. Um, like no,
Okay, so they talk about the big door,
the
the
big
big great
doors. You
door
have all like
after
the
you go through the
tree with
portal.
all the feathers at the
The
bottom,
tree
and then like
Mm-hmm.
it has
branches
different
out. It's
names
got
of God. It says Sephiroth on it.
yeah.
Um, but keep in mind that door is the design of that door is different depending on who went through it.
Well, yeah, of course it is. That's fine. But the basic design of that tree looking thing where it go and it has all the bubbles and stuff on it, that's that's from like Kabbalah
Mhm.
stuff. So it's like
Yeah,
Jewish mysticism.
Mm,
Um, and
feel it.
like so what's very interesting about that is you have like it crazy stuff, symbols, circles, names, and it's like so interesting that they you sort of work that into um, alchemy because you have all these different symbols and whatnot that seem to correspond to, you know, chemicals or elements or
hmm
whatever else in that the transmutation circles. And it's just cool that they have all those that symbols and whatnot, and that somehow that knowledge of those things leads you closer to this knowledge of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Even the name
Um,
Adonai is on the door.
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the name Elohim is on the door. Um, and then like I was reading some stuff about the Kabbalah and the Tetragrammaton, and they were talking about like if you take the four letters in Hebrew and stack them on top of each other, they take the form of a man.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool.
Um, and
Hmm.
I was like, whoa, that's pretty wild. Um, and so like there's just and obviously like it's extra biblical. It's not it's Jewish mysticism, whatever else. But it's I think stuff like that's cool just because I feel like there's little like hints of stuff in there for
Well,
other
one, it
things.
tells you
But
that
it just
the
shows.
people who created it, I mean, I don't think anything was accidental with that. Like, it's
Oh,
very intentional. They did the research. They're familiar at least with it, and which adds to the quality of the show altogether.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think it's one of the reasons why FMA is one of the best things that come out of Japan for anime. It's like this isn't just so reliant on common Japanese knowledge or common Japanese culture like a lot of stuff is. Our Arakawa, right? Or Arakawa, she must have researched so much stuff to put into this story
There's a
because
lot of stuff
not
for
one
Ava
piece of
too.
it comes from one culture. And Eva,
Yeah, Evangelion.
yeah, I still
Yeah,
haven't seen past the
no, it's
first
fine.
episode.
There's the whole series, and then there's like three movies that you have to watch at the end, and then there's the reboot, which is just like it's still it's a reboot, but it's you have to watch it after because it's tied. It's
Okay,
weird time stuff.
interesting.
Um, but yeah, that was the
But
last
on
thing I had on my
on those
notes.
on those doors, like yeah, it's like I said, it depends whose portal of truth that is. It design varies, but remember that the door from the flask, his door was blank. There wasn't a single sketch or etching on his portal of truth.
Oh
Just a
wow.
big blank gray slab. And I don't know, just spitballing here, maybe that's because he doesn't have a heritage. There's no history behind him that could really come up with some sort of, uh, you know, this is where he's coming from. I mean, I assume that it varies based on who you are, and probably based on where you came from.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, there's probably some symbolism related to that, or
Yeah,
it might just be that he's nothing.
yeah,
He has all of his all he has no real identity.
That could be it.
yeah. At the end, he's just the dwarf in the flask.
He could have,
Even
but
and
he could have been something else.
right, yeah, a lot of symbolism, like
Man, all
God
of like for,
going as like different form, like God reflects the form of whoever he's speaking to. Like he showed, like in front of Ed, and he has Ed's arm and leg, which is like I would be so angry, and like there's my arm and there's my leg. Really, honestly, that's just insulting. That's just hurtful.
Well, I mean, it was a trade. Now it belongs to Truth.
Yeah, I know. Still,
You
it
can have
hurts.
this knowledge, and I get your arm and your leg.
Truth
And I've
hurts.
always, I've always really appreciated the fact
haha.
that Ed doesn't get his entire. I appreciate the fact that Ed doesn't get both appendages back. That he's left not just with scarring up here from the automail, but he also is going to forever have that automail leg, and he just
Mhm.
has to be fine with it.
And he loses his alchemy. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and the fact
at
that
the
he
end
gives
of
it up willingly, like this kid goes from being an arrogant guy that thinks that he can just work around the laws of science and nature and God and have no repercussions, and by the end of it, he's just like, you know what, I don't
Well,
care anymore.
because
yeah,
I
and he
like it's the counter to what Father did, because Father gave up like everybody else, all other people, for that knowledge and alchemy, and at the end, Ed has to make the opposite decision. He has to give up knowledge and alchemy for people.
yeah, yeah, and it's something that he used for his goals. And Droba and even said that, you think of alchemists, they're gods because they're able to reconstruct and do all this stuff. But he, like you said, he gives all that up, and he gives it all up. And truth tells him, you did the right thing, you made the right choice. In the end. So
That's the right
and
answer.
I love it because Truth looks happy that he made the right answer. Because he's always come across as smug and like, I love causing people pain. But when Ed figures out the right answer, he's just like, even though he's got no facial features, you could just see the joy
But
on him
what's
on his
what's
face.
interesting is I don't know that he figured it out. I think he was just like, you know what, I'm gonna make this leap here, and it sort of like reminds me of like it's impossible to please God without faith,
hmm
and it's like so he doesn't know that this is gonna work,
right,
but he's like,
yeah,
here we go,
yeah. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. Yeah, absolutely.
and
And
that's the
boy,
only
was
time
Truth
that we
pleased.
ever see. That's the only time that we ever see uh, truth be happy, is when somebody like in faith takes that leap, and he's like, yeah, that's it, and then we get that juxtaposition of in just a little while later of the dwarf being in front of truth with all of his mighty works that accomplished literally nothing. It's like
Right.
everything that all those works that you did that you thought were going to make you worthy of being God,
hmm
you in that empty door, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
Why,
Yeah.
God? Why? Why did you reject me? That happened before Ed's
Okay.
giving up of alchemy, but yeah.
Well, if you
Um,
do right, will you not be accepted?
No,
there's no hope for you.
you can't do to be accepted.
Well, I was specifically referencing Cain when it's like,
Oh,
if you do what is
sorry.
right, will you not be accepted? That's what God
All
said
right.
to him.
My bad. Sorry. It's a different dispensation. All right. Gotcha.
Oh, and when Ed does that though, Truth has to like presses him on the question just to make sure, like, are you positive now? You would do that. You would lower yourself to just be a lowly human. And Ed's answer to that is it just shows how much he's grown because he says, what do you mean just a lowly human? That's all I've ever been, just a lowly human who couldn't save one girl. And of course, all the Nina fans have to cry at that point. But
I'm crying on
he's
the inside.
he's gone from arrogant kid to actual humility, which counters the dwarf because, as far as we know, he was a very humble creature in the beginning. But the more tastes of power he got, the more ambitious he became. And I like this thing. I like the idea of, like, first, what was he just, all I really want to do to be happy is leave this flask. Goes from that to, I want the power of God!
In
Not
anime.
opposing to. And anime!
That's the
That wraps it up for
show.
today!
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I honestly like. I think this is the longest that we've actually talked about one of the series. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
because typically we get like off track and we start talking about other stuff, but then we keep. But
Which we
there's so
did.
much to be said about the series.
It's so well made, and not to just dump on Naruto, but I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I finished it. I am hard pressed to rewatch anything
It
Naruto
it's
ever
incomparable.
again. It really is. FMA Brotherhood it's so good, and there's so much substance, and it's not relying. I mean, you got this really cool sci-fi, mystical alchemy, but you got great characters, you got great storytelling. There's not a bunch of filler junk. It's just it's all meat. It's great. Love it. It's delicious. Except for Envy turning to a giant green thing. That scares me. But besides that,
I really have
and
to
there's so much.
stress
I'm
that
sorry. Go ahead.
that show would be perfect if Envy's giant green monster form wasn't CGI'd, because that did not age well at all.
Well, I mean, they did what they could. And there's so much we didn't even touch on. We didn't touch on like the fights with the different like seven deadly sins. Like Roy Mustang versus Lust is just. I watch that, and each time I just thinking about, I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, I love that. Just snapping has never been so just just so demanding in all my life. But man,
Oh yeah,
good
there's
stuff.
still sometimes I'm just like, it's like
If only this worked. We just did a video in A Real Training about Alex Louise Armstrong, which would be probably my second favorite character.
yeah,
Um, and and that would be because when it comes to Armstrong, he has a past that is not touched on for very long, but it's enough to give you an idea of what this man has been going through for the past 10 years about. Because when he was sent down to Ishvala, or the land that the Ishvalans inhabited, to take part in the War of Extermination, and he holding that child in his arms, crying, his mustacheless face crying, it's just a moment of, you can see conflict in his eyes, because at one hand he doesn't want to betray his military, but on the other hand he knows that he can't possibly bring himself to do something so terrible.
Right.
And while he does wind up leaving the battlefield sort of disgraced, and his sister keeps bringing it up, what a disgrace, you ran away from, you're just a coward. um in his mind, I believe that he in retrospect would say, I wouldn't have just left. I would not have left the battlefield. I would have left the military, but I would not have left the battlefield, and I would have fought for the people that were being slaughtered. And so he carries that guilt with him. And I think that Armstrong's happy-go-lucky demeanor that you see most of the show, I think it's more or less just a facade.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he is. Another great thing about the show, every character has that depth to them.
yeah. There's layers.
Armstrong isn't just passed down of generations, and I want to make this rock turn into a spear, and size up and all this stuff. But I mean, there's a man, and there's emotions, and there's conflict, and like I said, he left the battlefield, but the battlefield didn't quite leave him. So
And so when it comes time for it, when the coup is taking place, or even before the coup is taking place, Armstrong knows that there's some crap going on with the senior staff, so he's more than willing to keep a secret, to feed information to people like Mustang or the Elrics, because he knows that something's going to happen, and he doesn't want to be the guy that did nothing this time. And when it's finally time to take the fight to the people he's sworn to to protect the people he's been sworn to work with, the military, he doesn't hold anything back, and he gets out there and he does his job the way he should have done it years ago. That kind of living with regret and wanting the chance to to do it right in the future, I can relate to that.
Well,
A lot of characters like that. But
I've said everything that I've had planned to say about Fullmetal Alchemist. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to end with?
it's such a good show. It's great.
It is
It's
such a
amazing.
good show.
You haven't watched it, you should not be watching this because major spoilers.
Oh
It's
yeah,
so
we
good.
just spoiled.
We didn't even
some
touch
of
on like Kimberly and his like psychopathic
Oh my
tendencies
gosh.
and
We-
like just
There's
there's
a
so
lot to talk
much
about.
and it's so good, so good. Wrath's still my favorite character. I don't care. So good. Riza Hawkeye's up there, probably number 4, 5. Possibly.
She's pretty cool.
You're
Um,
useless in rain. But anyway,
All right.
Oh,
well,
real quick,
yeah.
if I could make it real quick. The fact that Mustang and the people who are trying to push him to the top to get to that Führer spot are doing so knowing that pretty much all of them that took part in the Ishvalan war are going to be tried as war criminals once he gets that power. That is the example of someone doing what is right, not what is convenient. Because he could claim that power and just swear to make sure that this never happens again, but he still wants that chance to have themselves tried, because it's just the right thing to do. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to give
Nope, that's
Mustang
okay.
props for that.
So we had a lot of stuff to say about Fullmetal Alchemist. If you have anything that you'd like to add, you're welcome to leave it in the comments. If you have a topic that you'd like to see us talk about, whether or not it's anime, theology, a combination of the two, you can leave that in the comments as well. We thank you guys very much for watching this episode of The Power of God and Anime. And we'll see you here in a couple of weeks. Until next time, guys, good luck and train hard.